crowded on the podium. And I definitely don't want to mess with the electronics and technology. Okay. Here I am. So, good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Robert Klein. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs. I want to thank you all for being here. This is the fourth Campus-Wide Leadership Series presentation for this year. I'd like to extend a special welcome to colleagues who are watching online. There's routinely, 60 to 70 that are introverts and sit at their desks and plug in. And special thanks to the support of the University of Kansas Health System that really helps make this whole series possible. Before I introduce our guests, it's rare that Jenny Mehmet is actually sitting here. She's usually out there, and she's put together a terrific series, so could we give her a round of applause? She does know that we need more sports people, so we kind of got oversaturated last year with sports people, so we're doing better this year, more balance. I'm pleased to introduce our guest speakers, Daniel and Ebony Edwards. So, starting with Daniel, with a degree in architectural engineering, he knows how to build things. But the challenge of building back decayed urban neighborhoods took his education to a new level. For the past 5 years, Daniel and his wife Ebony have worked to understand the dynamic of urban development, a field with which Ebony is very familiar. Ebony received her doctoral degree in community psychology. She has spent the last 10 years conducting research and evaluating both large-scale, publicly funded, and small community-based programs and policies in multiple sectors. Together, they founded the Urban Building Project, a catalytic neighborhood development that will provide optimized spaces built around how people live. It's part of a broader vision to rebuild thriving life and overlooked communities, including integration with jazz, arts, and more. It may look rude, but I need to leave shortly after this introduction because of the Chancellor's installation in Lawrence. And I was telling somebody, I actually drove through a red light the other night, so I want to drive a little more slowly than I usually do to Lawrence. So I apologize for being rude, but there is a purpose behind it. The title of Daniel and Ebony's presentation is Whatever It Takes. Would you please welcome our guest speakers? Thank you.
Thank you.
How's everybody going? I'm trying to Facebook Live this joint. Is that okay? Everybody say hi. We got to step our social media game up. I'm not going to Facebook Live the whole thing, but hold on. Hey, y'all, it's about to go down. All right, peace. We'll put this out later. Cool, it's ending. Hey, everybody. Let me press play first.
I think that there's a lot that can be done when the community stands up and says, hey, we're not going to disregard the entire portion of our city and say that people can't be educated or that's just the way it has to be. So I guess that's the dream that's on my heart.
There are norms that we have taken in and we don't even realize we project.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the hard part.
That you what? Norms that you what?
You take in, that you project.
That you project. Exactly right.
And
exactly right.
That goes both ways.
Exactly.
And the first and the hardest step is admitting I do these things. A lot of people walk around and they're oblivious they even do that.
I think to have a dream is to do what you love in life because it takes away the pressure of money. If you do anything well, somebody's going to find you. It's a matter of aiming as high as you can with what you do. It could be arranging meetings, for people to network. It could be anything.
All right. So we'll explain that here in a little bit.
Shout out to Craig in the back for that video.
Yeah.
Extremely talented.
Our little brother is he's amazing. So, you want to start? Okay. We were invited by one of your former colleagues.
Yeah. Keep going.
And so it's
I'm very conscious of time, and my husband tends to talk very slowly and detailed. So I'm going to try to keep us on track because we have so much to talk about. So just excuse me if I try to usher him along.
It's the story of our marriage. So yeah, this is my wife, my boo thing, and I am her husband. We're here to talk to you today about whatever it takes. So I want to start you off with kind of dreaming with us for a little bit. And just like, could you imagine a neighborhood and a community where everything is fair? Everything is fair. Like everything is fair. There's fair, equal access to opportunities. There's fair and equal access to housing, regardless of how much housing you can afford. It's still a quality house, regardless if you spend $1 million or you spend $150,000 or you're renting for $600 a month or $4,000 a month. It's all fair. It's all equal.
There's fair and equal access to education because people actually live in a neighborhood who care enough to be involved in their schools or to open a school in their own home or to think of other children in that neighborhood like their own and provide them with the same opportunities that they give their own children.
And I think one of the biggest ones is fair as far as income, equality. So we could care less how much money you make, just be our neighbor. And we could care less what your skin color is or what language you speak or what your background is, just be our neighbor. And we can care less, like maybe all of our kids raised and they grow up together. And so like, could you imagine that? And then could you imagine that in Kansas City? Because I don't know if you're familiar with KC, but we got some stuff we got going on here. So why are we doing this? I wanted to start with our whys first, since this is kind of more about leadership. I think start with why is always super important with whatever you do. There's a TED Talk called Start With Why by Simon Sinek. If you have not seen that, you really need to go see that. But start with why. Let's start there. Why? We love each other. 2, look at that little girl. She's so cute. So that's our oldest daughter. She's 2. She just had her 2-year birthday, Evan. That's our new daughter. That's almost here in hopefully 3 more weeks. I don't know. Check that out. So that's baby Ezra hanging out in there. And we really wanted to like make sure our daughters grew up in a community where they didn't have, they just hung out with everybody in there. It's parents. They grew up with white people, black people, Hispanic people, whoever it is, the most diverse community we could ever create. So that's kind of like why we started doing all this. Go to the next slide.
So just a little bit of background and to add to what Daniel has said for me personally. I've told the story so much in the last week, but before that I hadn't told it much. It's about why I do what I do, my focus on, as you heard, on community psychology. So maybe about 10 years ago now, it was a little more than 10 years ago now. I was a freshman in college and I woke up early in the morning to go to an 8 a.m. class and I heard a really peculiar sound and it was that of a baby. I heard a baby crying. College campus, 8 a.m., didn't make any sense to me. So in looking around and trying to figure out where that sound was coming from, what I discovered was a young mother who had a child in a stroller, and she was behind my dorm at the time and actually was looking for food in the trash can. And I saw her reach into the trash can and give her daughter whatever she could find in the trash can. And that just really changed my life. So I'm originally from here, but I went to college in Atlanta, Georgia. My school was in the middle of a low-income area, and I just had not seen that type of desperation before. And so at that time, I pretty much decided that I needed to give my life back to a cause of creating more equity in the world. And so for me, pretty much everything since that moment that's driven me my entire life is to really support organizations. So specifically, you heard that you heard our who introduced us? Sorry, the Chancellor.
Vice Chancellor.
the Vice Chancellor. You heard the Vice Chancellor talk about my background in research and evaluation. And so that's really important to me because as an individual, I know that this is a huge issue that people are tackling. And as one person, how can I then approach such a large-scale problem? And so for me, it's partnering with organizations that are doing the work and helping them to discover the best ways to do it, and then also to understand how their progress and if they can do anything to better serve the less served, the underserved.
And then, completely not knowing her at all, hopefully it doesn't skip forward too far, which I think it's doing. Let's just keep it there. Oh, how do I go back? Turn off the transitions. Okay, so I'll just keep going back until I can't keep going back anymore. So my biggest situation was that I grew up here in Kansas City, on the Missouri side, on the east side of Kansas City, and I kept, we just grew up on 35th and Prospect, so blight, poverty, abandonment was normal, gunshots were normal, ambulance sounds were normal, sirens were normal, and you just kind of forget about it after a while. And then when I graduated college, I went to school at Rolla, got an engineering degree in architectural engineering, came back home. And then when I was gainfully employed, I started going out looking for housing. So I was looking into all the other places. And when I sat down with my first real estate agent, I drew a boundary that was buy me a house west of Troost, buy me a house west of Troost, this area, this area, this area. And then this project kind of happened. I was at J.E. Dunn. I worked at the company. I landed my dream job right out of college. So I thought this was super amazing, doing exactly what I wanted to do. And then this is 71 Highway. This is Prospect Avenue here. That's 27th Street. And 18th and Vine is right above us. What looks weird here, I already have it highlighted, is this big square. So this is 4 city blocks that was demolished to go build a police station. And this was 4 city blocks of housing and people and generations of families. And because of eminent domain and or the threat of eminent domain, the people in the neighborhood had no idea what was happening to them, and it just happened to them. And so I made a commitment at that point in time to figure out, what do I do? What is my role in doing all of this, since I grew up blocks away from there, in order to make sure that this never happens to anybody again in an underserved or overlooked community that's been forgotten about for so long and that has really just lost its voice over time. So, we just started asking questions. The first thing that we did, Ebony and I actually met at a conference in Cincinnati. So though we both grew up here in Kansas City, we met, I stalked her at a conference. I hid behind a column and I waited for her to walk past me, and I just stepped out hey, Ebony. And so that's kind of, we haven't stopped talking since. But then it was a social justice conference for the Children's Defense Fund. And both of us had really strong hearts to try to figure out what we can do and how do we bring that back to KC. Then we ended up getting dating, and then we ended up getting engaged, and then all that jazz from there. And so at some point we really started focusing on how do we both combine our efforts to focus our energy and start somewhere. We had picked a neighborhood, because you'll see here in a little bit, but we picked basically the same neighborhood that invented swing jazz, 18th and Vine, Charlie Parker, Count Basie, Duke Ellington. Charlie Parker got his start there, Count Basie got his start there, Mary Lou Williams, and then all the history that goes along there. So that neighborhood between 12th Street and 27th Street, between Prospect and Troost Avenue, once had 41,574 people. Crossroads downtown in Kansas City has less than 20,000 people that live there in Crossroads. So imagine taking a footprint smaller than Crossroads and putting it over in that neighborhood, and it's 41,000 people that live there. So imagine all the life and creativity that comes out of there. 15,000 houses, over 600 businesses. They said that $1 would recycle itself at least 8 times before it left the community. So it's it had its own infrastructure, and then it was able to incubate this thing we call swing jazz, right? We actually have the oldest jazz organization in the world in that neighborhood. So the Meet Your Musicians Foundation. And then in 2014, KC was ranked the 4th most abandoned and blighted metro in the USA. And this neighborhood that we chose went from 41,000 people to less than 3,000 people that actually live there in the neighborhood. We went from 15,000 houses to less than 3,000, or almost 3,500 houses. And we actually have more vacant land in our neighborhood than we do homeowners. So what do you do? Where did all the people go? Can we bring people back? Like, what do we do so we just kept asking questions like, what is our role in all of this? So, can rebuilding bring people? That was like one of our first initial questions that we started. When I proposed to Ebony, I said, hey, like, you want this really amazing wedding? That's great. Can you do one thing for me? Like, can we take our wedding venue budget and reinvest it into some vacant property in Kansas City? So that way we can start like rebuilding it and give it back to people after our wedding is over with. So we're just not burning like thousands of dollars on like a hotel or this or that. But do something where people can actually use it once we get done. So this workhouse castle, it was a third city prison built in the late 1800s. I went to high school right above it at the hill. It's on 20th and Vine. This is what it looked like when you first walked into it, when we first got there. Completely overgrown. WTF. What was happening? I mean, we literally stood at the door and we could not walk in just because it was just so much trash and so much crap. And I took Ebony there and I was like, yo. And she was like, oh, this is awesome. Wedding venue though? And so we literally just had to like pick up a piece of trash and like put it out the way, and then pick up another piece of trash and create an aisle. And then it kind of got to the point of where we just picked a corner and got started, and we just kept cleaning. We threw out a vision to people to say like, hey, removing blight could be super amazing, but let's make it fun if we do it. And so we threw out this vision to say, like, what if we turn this castle, this jail, into a wedding venue and a party venue? And then that started picking up traction. And days we would go out there, people would be dumping trash. And then as we started moving on, people would be picking up trash when we started going out. And so in 6 weeks, we turned that space into this, and we got married there. And so we clean out 40 or 42 tons of trash and garbage and debris. A couple hundred volunteers that came out to help us. Parks and Rec department was like huge and amazing with it. And then we got married, and it was super dope. It was way too much white from what I hear from my wife. It's way too much white. She should have been the only thing in white, the only person in white. But the wedding went off, and then after we did that, we gave it back to people, and we started throwing outrageous parties at the castle, and it was super amazing. And we had like hundreds of people at parties, and we were pissing people off, I heard, in the neighborhood and in city council, so that's a whole nother thing. And I think that that's where we... as a part of that progress and purpose of rebuilding the castle, we kind of found this greater vision, right? Like, so we found our purpose of rebuilding a neighborhood and a community. And then we found this picture, which was created in like 1988. And I have this quote, the best way to honor the past is to progress it forward. So this picture was of the castle. And the castle was supposed to become the Black Archives of Kansas City, and the properties across the street was supposed to become the International Jazz Hall of Fame. This was long before the American Jazz Museum came up. This is before the Black Archives is now located on 18th and Vine. Mm-hmm. And so we said there was a vision for people to use this space a long time ago. Like, how do we don't need another museum. We don't need another archives because it's all history. How do we like do something in KC that keeps it pushing forward? And keeps like new people coming into our city and into our town. So it was just, we kept asking questions. Let me see what the next one is. And so we decided, and we threw out this idea that said, like, what if we just create the jazz recording capital of the world in Kansas City and house it there? And it was like the most randomest idea, but it was like very big and it was very bold. And then we went out to go like, talk to people about it, like, yo, like we're gonna turn Kansas City into the jazz recording capital of the world. We're gonna get people back to this neighborhood. We're gonna rebuild it. And everybody was like, please leave. That's really good, but we got our own plan and we have our own vision for it. And so we just got to a point where we try to invite ourselves to the table. We try to show up and get involved and volunteer and be a part of community and be a part of the neighborhood. And then,
I will say though, it wasn't blatant, right? No one said that to our face. It was more so, I'd probably say about 90% of people just kind of ignored what we said.
yeah, they ignored it. Or they wanted to control how we did it.
Yeah.
So we had to go through them, kiss the ring, and then do it their way in order for them to
That's what they wanted.
So we just said, cool, we will create our own table. We tried to invite ourselves to the table, so we just created our own table.
Well,
Oh, can you press pause? I mean, turn the volume up. Fine. We can talk to this.
uh-oh.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, you don't want the music?
No, we don't need the music.
I
It's
like
just
the
music.
Okay. So, invite ourselves to the table and create your own table, right? But, so invite ourselves to the table. We were, and mainly, well, I did some too, but I was going to say mainly Daniel. Anything that was remotely related to what we were doing, what we were interested in, we were there. And we were new. People didn't know who we were, but we took the risk of showing up and talked about what it is that we were doing. And so, this is actually a result of that, because in the process of continuing to say what it is that we wanted to do, we met the right people. It only took a few people, really, to get us to this point.
It was like we literally just threw out this idea. We surrounded ourselves with the right people, or got in front of the right people. Mm-hmm. And then magically those people started inviting us to places to say, hey, you should tell your story here, and you should tell your story here. And then we get to the Federal Reserve Bank. I went to the Federal Reserve Bank one day, randomly, not knowing what I was there for. Talked to a guy. He ended up being the host, and I didn't know that. And then while I was talking, he said, Daniel, tell everybody about what you're doing. And so it was a creative placemaking event. And creative placemaking is using art and community and culture to rebuild neighborhoods. So it's not necessarily like building art centers. It's the creative process of how you bring community together to build it. So he's a national creative placemaking guy. We were sitting in front of every foundation in Kansas City. I had no idea. I told him our story. And then Mary Kemper Wolf at the Kemper Foundation said, somebody needs to have coffee with you and support you. So we had coffee the next week. She said, hey, wouldn't it be amazing if there was like a recording label over for jazz in that neighborhood? And I was like, well, hey, Mary, wouldn't it be amazing if we created the jazz recording capital of the world in this neighborhood? And so she was like, yeah. And her perspective was that Julie Irene Kaufman went all the way around the world to every major venue to figure out how do we create a global performing arts center here in Kansas City. And her perspective was that the prestige of jazz, of what we've created in this city, in this town, should have the same type of space. We should have the same type of space east of Troost. So she sent us around the world, and we went to every major jazz festival around the world. That was what you just saw. So we went to Paris, we went to Montreux, Switzerland, we went to Canada,
Copenhagen,
Dubai. So we went all around the world in 27 days to every major jazz festival, and we were exhausted. That's where Evan came from too. So Mary is our fairy godmother. And so we came back home, and we were just like, man, well, I guess even while we were away, the creative placemaking guy that introduced me at the Federal Reserve Bank, this is Theaster Gates. And he's on the south side of Chicago, and he's been taking vacant and abandoned properties on the south side and using arts and creativity to transform those properties and transform the south side of Chicago. He is the leader of this creative placemaking movement in our country from an actionable standpoint. So when I was on the plane, I started reading this book that I got from the Federal Reserve Bank, and I'm like, hey, that's that guy. The guy who wrote the book is the guy that introduced me. So I emailed him. I'm like, hey, Jamie, can you connect me with Theaster? I hear he's in. We got to Paris, and somebody was like, Theaster Gates is in Paris. I was like, Theaster's in Paris? So I emailed Jamie, and I said, Jamie, I think Theaster's in Paris. Can you connect us? And then Jamie's like, sure, Theaster Daniel Theaster. And like hours later, we're having dinner at the Louvre with Theaster Gates, talking about like all of our development and our project. And he's like, you want to do this? You want to do this? You want to do this? Come visit me. Talk to me about it. Tell me what you got going on. This lady here, Jan, we had no idea who we were meeting with when we got to, where was this? Gateshead, Newcastle. Mm-hmm. Yeah. She's actually the president of all the European Jazz Network. So every jazz entity in Europe is under her umbrella. And it's like, oh, Like in Europe, so Italy and everywhere, they're all under her umbrella. And she's like, whenever you guys need people, we'll just start shipping them over. It's like, okay. Noor, she's actually with the UAE, and she's their creative ambassador for the country. And we just ended up hanging out with her. She toured us around. We went bowling. It was super dope. It was hot. It was July. Don't ever go to Dubai in July. Oh my God. Let me see. So it was like we just started surrounding ourselves with people with bigger dreams and bigger dreams. And then I come to avoid the trolls. So once we got back, people were pissed. Like we were given a building from the city. People were pissed that we got press. People were upset that we were making progress. Mm-hmm. People were upset that we were the newcomers on the scene, and who are we to do all of this when they've been having visions for decades about what they wanted to do and haven't been able to make progress. People were pissed that we were able to write a grant and get funded to go around the world. People saw that and said that, well, if you're able to write grants, as in, for instance, with the castle, if you're able to write grants, this castle is worth maybe $150,000, but because you can grant write, we're going to put a value on it at $1.5 million. So it's like, oh, cool. We can not work with that. But then as we started to make more and more progress from a leadership perspective, we had to figure out how do we avoid the trolls in the process of going after our dreams. You want to say anything about that? Mm-hmm. So yeah, we just kind of hit every barrier. And it got so bad that everything that we had built up completely collapsed. Like when I say completely collapsed, like we went into a hole. People were making accusations that we had hacked into Homeland Security and tried to steal property and do like the most random stuff. Like we were stealing grant money and doing all this crazy stuff. And it was because like people were just upset that there was so much progress happening in such a short amount of time, and they weren't controlling that progress. So we kind of went off into our hole, and we refocused and reset on our why. Like, why are we doing this? Because it's so easy to just like go get a job. Ebony's been my sugar mama for the last 4 or 5 years since we married. And I say that openly because like it's been a blessing to have a wife that supports you. And I told her like when we first got married, like, babe, we're going to rebuild this community. Like, you hang on here. I'm going to figure out how we make money. It took me a really long time to figure out how we make money, but now we're there. And so we're like coming full circle. But together, our why started to grow as a couple and as a family, and our purpose more is just Kansas Cityans and what we're here to do. So, build your table and invite others to join you. So this idea all kind of, once we went back into our hole and reset, when I moved Ebony from Chicago, I promised her 3 things. I promised her a view of downtown, because she stayed in downtown Chicago. So I promised her a view of downtown. I promised her a running pass. She was like, I ain't got no running pass because of Kansas City and I'm running downtown Chicago. And I promised her the most diverse community she ever seen in Kansas City, because she said KC is super racist and is segregated. It's still that way. She didn't want to come back here. She could have took her doctorate and went to any place in the country and done her research. So why should she come back to KC? So I said, I'll create you the most diverse community you've ever seen. And so we started with, part of that was like, okay, we want to move our family over to the same neighborhood where the castle is. But once you get over there, you would be literally the only person on the block, because everything else is vacant. So she didn't want me to move her without having neighbors. So I said, okay, we'll make access for other people to join, and we'll get more neighbors. And then that dream started to grow, to say like, well, what if we created this neighborhood built on performing arts and creative placemaking and creativity, where we bring all that back to a neighborhood, into a community. And then that kind of transformed into like, okay, well then what if we turn this into the jazz recording capital of the world? Why don't we just kick it up a couple notches, so that way the world is experiencing this new community that we create. And then I think the last piece is like, what if all this work that we do combines to turn this into a global neighborhood? Like a truly global neighborhood where the world is coming, where people are experiencing culture, where they're creating their own culture within the community. A place where we're on the same platform as Nashville. When people think about country music, they think about Nashville. When they think about hip hop, they think about LA and Cali and other places now. But when they think about jazz, we could really niche ourselves if we do this right into jazz, right? We don't have to just do jazz, but that could be our niche where people come in from all over the world, and then that creativity kind of like explodes out from there. So we started our own table. We started our own company.
I'm going to jump in. Sorry. I just wanted I'm going to back up just a second because I don't know if this point was clear, but so yes, we encountered a lot of obstacles when we returned from our trip, and that resulted in severed relationships, severed trust, unfortunately, toward us. People, Daniel mentioned that we had the rights to the building, to the castle, and the building across the street as well that we were going to turn into the jazz recording capital of the world. And because all that happened, that just was taken away from us. And so the shift was because it was a necessary shift. And so it was, okay, this is the reason why we're doing this, coming back to what is our why and what's our purpose. How can we still accomplish this even though we virtually had no support to do what we felt like needed to be done in this neighborhood? At that point, I mean, we're a couple years past that point now, and still nothing has happened by other people who want the same things for this neighborhood. So it was, we have to make this happen. How do we make this happen if this is what we're serious about?
Yeah.
And so then became the transformation of, well, the why is rebuilding this neighborhood. And the hook is jazz. That was always the point. So how do we kind of flip this a little bit so that we can still accomplish this purpose, but maybe not starting out with this really grand, we're going to turn this building into the physical jazz recording capital of the world. Because actually the whole point is not about a particular building, right? It's more so about the neighborhood anyways.
Yeah.
You can go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that was a big thing. Like, if you create the jazz recording capital of the world in a physical building, you need foot traffic to support that building. A neighborhood that has very little people, it's very hard to get foot traffic there. So you have to actually build out the physical neighborhood and bring residents back into the neighborhood so people are excited to come to the neighborhood. So there's always like this, like, if this happens, then this, if this happens, then this, if this happens, then this. And so residential housing was always one of our things. It was just like 10 years down the line. And then since we got knocked off our saddles, we just said, all right, screw it. I drove around the east side, and I drove to try to find her a view of downtown. I got to the top of a hill, and I found that the land was owned by a church. So I called the church up. They didn't know they owned the land. They were about to lose it at tax auction. So we paid all their back taxes off. We transferred the land over, and then we built a partnership with them that gives them 10% back of whatever we build and sell on that property. So that way there's a longer term lasting. So every house we build on a property that they own, they get 10% back of that out of our final profits. And so it makes this a long term like commitment to each other. And then it's a church, so you gotta give back. But now we got a view of downtown, right? I have her view, and it is amazing.
It is good.
It is a good view. And with that property came 4 acres. So we bought 38 lots. Then we just been buying up land. And so we ended up buying pretty much 3/4 of a single block, half of another block, and then some spread out properties around there. So we just said, like, okay, we're going to rebuild. We're just going to shift our focus from trying to create this jazz recording capital of the world, and we're just going to baby step our way into this and build up a neighborhood first, build that community out so it's super strong and solid as a community, invite other people into it, and then merge ourselves within the existing community, which is a whole nother point that we'll talk about a little bit later. And we just started to create our own table. So as a husband and wife, we created Urban Building Project. You got something to say?
I do, but keep going. I want to be conscious of time.
Okay. So this is what we do: research and development, strategy development. That's all Ebony. That's what she does. Community empowerment. Taking those research things that we found to use those to build out and empower our community. And then real estate development. Once I figure out the gaps that Ebony finds in our community, lack of density, lack of housing, lack of people, I turn that into built space. So that's where we're starting out with housing. We're eventually moving into like commercial properties, recording studios, a park. So whatever it takes to rebuild this neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, you kind of hit on it there. You said recording studios. I think that this is, again, so I'm sorry, I'm struggling with this. I'll just be transparent and say, Daniel has spent a lot of time recently working on the MovementKC being the residential development part of it, but that I think sometimes he forgets that it's still intertwined with the original
creative placemaking, the jazz vision, all of that. So, for instance, with moving into this neighborhood, we're looking at a partnership. It's called the Old Lollipop Land. And so it's a preschool that's right, on the corner of where we're starting our building. And we are looking at a partnership to turn that into a live recording venue. As well, we'll get to this, I know, but as well, we continue to live record. So the idea of creating a jazz recording capital of the world has shifted from a physical place to now how do we inspire a whole neighborhood to be.
And still, I know we're going to get to this. That's why I'm sorry. I keep in my mind. I'm thinking about it, but it's really just that we're still showcasing this to the world.
Yeah. So these are the things that we fight as on a daily basis: control versus collaboration. It seems like that's more of a generational thing that we've been running into. Buy low, sell high. So that's a typical developer's mindset. You buy as low as you can. You go to the hood. You buy his property as low as you can. You sell it for as much as you can. We could care less about how it impacts the people long term. That's just what we're going to do. Versus how do we create win-wins where as a developer you profit, as a neighborhood you profit, as people that we partner with land transactions, they win too as well. Affordable versus market rate. It's like the second you go to try to build any kind of property or do anything, whether it's like rentals or housing or commercial properties, everybody wants you to do it for like low income, affordable housing. It's just the way that it happens.
If it's on the east side.
If it's on the east side. The second we can go any other community, you're like, oh, you can make as much money as you want. The second you go east of Truce, it's like, no, you can't make that much money. You can't make any money. You got to do this as a nonprofit.
Your housing can't have high quality.
You can't have we're building market rate housing starting off so that way we can get to affordable and attainable housing long term through volume. But banks won't fund market rate housing over in this neighborhood. So it's just like, So it's a lot of hurdles that we cross. Black and white, always one thing. East side versus all the rest of Kansas City. And then gentrification versus rebuilding. So gentrification versus rebuilding, it's we're actually located right outside downtown and Crossroads. There's been more people moving back to the city. There's been a ton of white people moving back to the city. They all left. All the black people followed them. Now the white people are moving back, and all the black people are still out in the burbs right now. They're not back in the neighborhood. And so it's like, well, where did all the people go? How do we rebuild? Do we say all black people move back to this neighborhood? But then we're just segregating further the neighborhood. So how do we do that? We got this global jazz thing, right? So how do we get the world to our neighborhood to experience that? And so these are all the things that we've been kind of focusing on. And then we've just picked our little island. I say our island. We stay south of 18th and Vine, so we're not a part of all the madness that's going on 18th and Vine right now. But we're able to book in the neighborhood. We're still within the neighborhood, so we can still bring creativity and excitement and joy back to the neighborhood.
About those themes that Daniel just displayed, I think it's really important for us to talk about how we've addressed those. Because those are criticisms actually that we receive frequently in this work. And so for us, these are just some of the things I thought about. I don't know if you have others, but so I would just say in general, with public scrutiny specifically, because we've had some people attack us about these things outrightly, is to challenge the status quo. So especially with a term like gentrification, many people will say to us now, it's a loaded term. So many people have a different idea of what that term even means. And so to just challenge people to really think deeper about, well, what do you mean by that? And why is that important? So that we can get to a place of, well, is what we're doing really, if we think about the essence of what you care about, your concern within that topic, is what we're doing really addressing that or not? And, you know, that's the way that we have to approach others, but it's also the things that we have to take ourselves, right? Reflect on for ourselves. And then invite others to think with you. So I think you're going to say some more about Feast later, but that video that you saw in the beginning there. But it's about having a space to have a dialogue with people and being open and allowing other people to be open and be honest about the issue, whatever it may be, so that we can collaborate on how we actually still make change, even if there's an elephant in the room.
Yeah, we've been really, because people use gentrification, they just say it's bad and it's loaded, which it technically stem from a bad perspective. But that's a catch-all for things that we've been exploring. Like, are you really saying that that's really a problem? Because if you spent your money and you moved to a neighborhood, would you not want your property value to increase? So if you wanted your property value to increase, how do we protect it so that way taxes don't increase for other people long term? Right. So it's like breaking down these points so we can properly create solutions.
We can actually make progress, because the issue is that it then perpetuates the cycle, so nothing changes if we don't actually talk about it.
Yeah. So keep going, and then we should be close to here. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to go block by block to rebuild. We're going to take our first block, our starter block. We have, what was that?
Can you just keep going through slides? Do you have a lot of slides?
Yeah, no, not really. Okay. Take our first block, move 16 families to it. We already got 16 families committed. We are going to be breaking ground here within the next month on the first 6 houses. We got a wait list of about 30 families. There are people in Kansas City who are like business owners, people that have been committed to Kansas City long term, and where everybody else thought that they couldn't be committed to it. And we're all going to move back to a block and raise our kids together. We don't look like each other. We don't come from the same neighborhoods, but we're all choosing to do something different. And then on this journey, like I go back, I did want to put this in here and like cry, yell, groan, but keep growing. Or keep going. There's just problems. Like, you know, there's always hiccups when you're going down a path of rebuilding neighborhoods or communities or doing stuff that just is really impactful long term, but it takes a lot of energy. So this house was going to be the house that we were going to renovate and turn into a house for our jazz artists, because we were going to use this as like the starter project. And we did this project called Record to Rebuild. So every project we recorded, the proceeds would go to rebuild this house and turn it into a recording studio. And then I went out after 4th of July, and this is what happened. City sent us a demolition notice. We didn't respond to the demolition notice. The city sent us a demolition notice. The timing was completely off. They said they were trying to demo it before we even bought the property. And then by the time we came back home from vacation, it was smoke and rubble, and I just cried. Because I said, I said, like, when the crime lab happened and the police station happened, I will never let somebody come in and tear down a property again on the east side. And then it happened to our property with our name on it. It wasn't even like our business name. It was our name on the property.
Mm-hmm. I was going to add, we fought. We were fighting for it not to happen.
Yeah.
Because obviously if this is related to something prior to our ownership, we shouldn't be liable for it. And
then there's systemic barriers with development, right? Like, the city sent us a demolition notice. They say you got 10 days to remediate the problem. So we have 10 days to remediate the problem, right? And then you're in a neighborhood where there's no development around you. There's no comps. So a bank can't just go out and say like, oh, this property is worth $80 or $90 or $100,000 and here's a loan for that, because there's no comps to support that. So what we did is we went out and created a neighborhood, a new construction. So we got 16 families to get pre-approved to be like literally right next door and plop our houses down. And by the time we got that deal done, the house was torn down. So it's like, this is a systemic barrier that we've been running into. It's not just our project. This happens all the time in the city. We just got a bill that was dated 2 weeks ago for work that took place 4 years ago before we even took property ownership. And we get charged for it. Then we get fined for it. And this happens not just to us, it happens to people, East Truce, who have no idea what's happening. It happens to people in other cities or other places. So we're talking about like major systemic things that we're coming on. So it's really like, how do we stick with it, stay with our why, be creative as we approach this. So what we ended up doing, we started a record label, which is kind of weird. It's real though. We recorded our first album. Herman Mahari, he's a local trumpet jazz player. On his first day out, his album went #1 on the iTunes jazz charts across the world. And we had no idea what we were doing. And so the proceeds, again, we're supposed to go back to rebuild that space. We've been using this project. This is his first solo debut album. So it's been helping him all across the world. So that's a major and amazing.
The initiative is called Record
to Rebuild.
Thinking
you
creative.
can press the play button on there, but it's no music playing.
It's okay.
Okay.
Oh, no music, okay.
Yeah, and then we recorded 2 artists. So Crystal Warren, Herman Mahari. Her project has not come out yet. And so we will be putting that out here pretty soon. We're actually going to be throwing a concert on the 30th. I'll talk to you about that. So we did 2 albums, 2 projects. Those projects go to Record and Rebuild. And then the last thing is like building community. Build community and then build the community. When you're working in underserved, underinvested, or places where there's no traction to your idea yet, what we found is that we can build the community first of people. So this is the first time that our architect that was on the project said, I've never been a part of a development where all the neighbors know each other and they all have met each other way before they even break ground on their house. So even in the design process, we've been throwing barbecues, we've been throwing cookouts, get-togethers. And now we are actually in the process of building the physical community to put those people within. We built the relationships with the artists, we built relationships with homeowners. There's various points of entries. Those Feast KC projects, this is actually a rendering of what the neighborhood would look like because there's just no houses on the block right now. 6. But they're at the very end. But this is what a new block will look like. And then from the other direction as well. So it's literally like we've been building all these little micro communities to support this overall effort. And now we're to the point where we're going to build out the physical spaces to support those communities long term. And then we're just going to figure out how we do it. We know what we're doing to a point, but we're kind of leaving everything open to just say like, well, what do we want as a community and what does our city need? And not like Ebony and I just sitting down like, we're going to do this and we're going to do this. Because our generation, we would rather co-create as opposed to just control the process. So we've been opening up the doors. Those feast dinners that you saw there, was literally an opportunity, a different point of access. If somebody doesn't want to buy a house, if they don't want to record an album, maybe you could just come have dinner with us and just talk. So we just started a new feast series where it was 7 days back to back to back to back at our house. We are exhausted. We are tired. We kind of split up the days, but we went literally like Saturday, Sunday, no Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, not today, and then Saturday or tomorrow. And it's just 15 to 20 people every night at our house eating dinner with one question, and we just stick on that one question all night. And it's broken down so many ways of like how we build community. So leadership.
Yeah, I think you should. Do you know? If you know, you should go first because I think yours might be more tied to the presentation.
My leadership style, it is really whatever it takes. I'm really trying to, my overall goal is to help people increase their impact. That's the one question I ask, like what's the biggest dream on people's hearts? But my goal is to help people increase their impact. So right now I'm creating infrastructure that will help facilitate that impact. I'm an engineer. If I create one widget one time, that can be reproduced and repeated over and over. I'm creating a neighborhood and using the neighborhood as the widget to reproduce dreams and reproduce life. So
okay. So I created a flow for the presentation, and then Daniel put the presentation together. So sorry for like mishaps throughout the presentation, but so my personal leadership style. I just said 3 things. I deal mostly in general in the past with people and also with strategy. And so with people, it's been really important to just to seek understanding, to listen, and try to understand people's perspective, because there are just so many differences, not just in this project, but as people, we just have so many differences that we have to work through if we're ever going to work together and actually create change together. And so that's with people. Strategy, because I'm a researcher, I'm going to say always look for best practices, and that's just what you lean on as a researcher. This guy has introduced me to a whole new realm of ideas. So for me, what I'm learning is with ideas, you just have to let go and commit. That's related to
I had to break her down, man. It took so long. Oh my God.
it's related to a few years back. We went rock climbing for his birthday, and that was the biggest personal lesson and even relationship lesson that we got out of rock climbing. If you've never been, go. It will challenge you, like to actually go outdoors and rock climb. And so that's kind of my philosophy now about ideas. Is how to first of all let go of like research to actually follow through with an idea, but then also merge best practices within that. Questions?
That's it.
Does anybody have any questions? Oh, do you? Yeah.
So where were the barriers? Was it just like from the community itself, or from the structure for the government? I mean, I'm just wondering, where were the barriers? It just seems like such a great idea.
We thought it was a great idea too.
Yeah.
Barriers came from. It's really difficult financially to get money into these communities. So. From a bank side, there's barriers. From the government side, the government is waiting for finances to be invested first before they commit. From an investor, the investor is waiting for other people to commit. So it's like you got to play this game. The other barriers for like socially came from people that had been in the community. It seemed like that had different interest for like personal self-organizations as opposed to like actual neighborhood and community once you stepped outside of that. And then a lot of people who just had ideas for what they thought gentrification was, but were never willing to come and sit down and talk to us.
I'm going to add a little bit to the first two things you said in terms of barriers. So the major issue is that we're focused. So MovementKC is actually our urban building project is focused on rebuilding in blighted neighborhoods, abandoned, overlooked neighborhoods. So one major issue to that is typically banks, investors are looking for comps. Well, if you're building in a neighborhood where there's no housing, that's really difficult, especially if you want to go in and do market rate housing. So the conversation before about, are we talking about affordable versus market rate? If you don't want to build affordable housing, it's very difficult to do that. And the second thing you said about people socially is that, honestly, I think this is probably in any community, but there are agendas that already exist and that have existed for years. Mm-hmm. And so when people have been working on things behind the scenes, again, because we're not really seeing the product of that, but they've been working on an agenda for a long time, it's very hard to then change what a lot of people know should happen, or the plans to happen.
Yeah, we're like on a speedboat and they're on a cruise liner. So it's just like...
Thank you. So my family struggles with how best to help, whether that's giving our time or our money. And I admire that you have taken that on in such a real way to make such a big impact. Do you have any advice? Like, I've read that it's more effective to try and work on policy changes. So I should be more active with More Squared. Are you familiar with that organization? And then I had someone just tell me at a conference last weekend that, well, policy, if there's no investment in the policy doesn't matter. Yeah. Anyhow. So in the meantime, there are a lot of hungry people that need to be fed and babies that need diapers. And, we try and give and volunteer at all those places, but, I don't think we're going to move, but we would love to come to dinner. Is there something else we can know what?
We can move you down to the hood. It's going to be tight.
Yeah. But even dinner is where it starts. That's what we're finding with Feast. The whole purpose of Feast was to engage people into community and to understanding the desires that we have for ourselves and for other people that we can collaborate on and actually make a difference on. And so, coming to dinner is a great place to start. But there are a lot of people that have that same question. And so I think like what we're trying to get to is Daniel talks about building an army, but actually mobility of these initiatives, getting power behind what should have advocacy representation for that doesn't. And because you're right, and we need people working on policy, we need people working with organizations that are doing all of those things. We need all of that. And then the question is just, well, how do we build a community where it doesn't matter what color you are, what your religious preference is, any of those things. It just matters our hearts and what it is that we desire for Kansas City.
Yeah, do we love KC or not? And I think that my wife and I, we found that as a problem, and we spent years trying to figure out, like, do we partner with these people, these groups, or do we just go build our own table? We were very hesitant to do that because everybody always goes out and builds their own table. They always go start their own organizations. I feel like my wife and I have been put on this earth to bridge that gap between East and West Kansas City, to make it safe for people to come from other parts of Kansas City to help rebuild, and to make the people within that community feel safe long term, because we are going to be there to support them and protect them. So we decided to create different points of access of how you engage with our project. Feasting is one of them. Feasting came from an idea before they started to rebuild communities in the Bible. They sat down and they feast before they even broke ground. So we're feasting and celebrating our way into this change, as opposed to just like guilting or shaming people. So come have dinner with us. April 30th is something I want to put out. If you like us on MovementKC or FeastKC, it's International Jazz Day. We're throwing a jazz concert at Lifted Spirits. It's a perfect way to just come and get to know people, right? Feast is very more intimate as opposed to like a big event. And that's really where we've been trying to shift our energy to, is to just go and be intimate with people around a table. It's way better to build relationships long term than it is to have a conference with 150 people over a weekend. You completely forget about it. People that feast with us, they start to see like their hearts coming out and their dreams coming out, to really challenge like how we do this together as a community. One of the things that came up just to feast real quick was, there's a young little white girl. She's not a young little white girl. There's a young white lady, and she said, "Who wants to start a revolution?" It was like hashtag "Who wants to start a revolution?" I'm like, you could say that, but I can't, because the second I say we're going to start a revolution, all hell's going to break loose. But you can say that. So it's like everybody understanding like our real roles and how we do this. Policy is there, but it's not the role. Because if nobody supports the policy outside of just the policy being created, the city will never implement it. And I've been on boards and commissions that they created policies years ago, but they never have done anything because there's no traction to do it. So either we build the community first, so we can build the policies, so we can build the community. So.
Does anybody else have a question, or can I ask another one? So I was at a white privilege and racial inequity meeting last weekend, and there actually was.
Were there any black people there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The speaker, the keynote lecture was by a pastor who's also a professor at Central Baptist. Anyhow, he was talking about hollering, and that we're not hollering. He was using scripture, but he said we're not hollering enough. We're not protesting enough that things need to be changed. And he's the one who told me that policy without any investment is ineffective. So he said we need to get out and support the policies we feel need to bring about change. So I agree with you. The other thing I was going to ask about was, I know I used to drive on Volker, but I changed jobs. And I know there were a couple of upscale houses built east of Troost on Volker, or just off Volker. Do you know where I'm talking about?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Right next to UMKC.
Yeah, I didn't know if... Okay. So I didn't know if you saw any... Was there any benefit to...
So...
Troostwood.
Yeah, so... upscale housing is good. It's more so about the people in the community that goes within the housing. That's more important, and that's what we've been finding. There's Beacon Hill, which is right next door to us. $800,000, $500,000 homes, but I don't know how the people. I've never driven down Beacon Hill and seen kids outside playing. So it's like you can build amazing houses, but if you don't build the community before you build the housing, the community it's just bricks and mortar at that point in time. And hollering without relationships, to me, doesn't really go too far either. Because we can, like I said, we can do a march, we can get out and we can do all this stuff locally in Kansas City, and we can holler and yell. But if I don't have a relationship with you, once all that hollering and yelling is done, I'm never going to see you again. So I'd rather build a relationship with you, know I can count on you long term, and then the day that we need to push the button to go holler and yell, it will be way more impactful because we all know each other and we know what we're fighting for.
Thank you. I think we can do one more question if anybody has one.
I don't have to wait for the mic, or do I for the...
Yes, it's for the people listening.
Thank you. Hi, thanks for coming. My question is kind of multi-parted, and you can answer however you want. So I was at the last leadership series, and it was disabled but not really. And he talked about how he has a group of people who he talks to every morning at 5 a.m., a group of leaders. And I'm curious, I'm a newlywed with a young child. How do you manage leadership as a couple when you have your personal things that you didn't put the socks away, but that can't apply to, we're about to have this meeting about moving the whole culture, you know? So
you're a super newlywed.
Question number one, who do you go to? Do you have other couples that you go to for leadership? Are there people that you met in college? And then the second part is, how do you differentiate leadership as a couple with romantic proclivities?
I mean, mentors, we both have people that we kind of just surrounded ourselves with over time.
Yeah, we don't really have any couple mentors. I mean, we have like those couples that we aspire to be mentored by. And we tell them that we haven't built those relationships yet. We need to.
I spend a lot of time praying. And so I figure if I'm connected with God, he will give me direction for how to direct my household. So a lot of our stuff has kind of been solo. We would love more mentors, but we found that the people who are in our lives are literally there for the season that we need them. And that may sound really selfish, but it's just happened that way. And it's worked out really well.
I maybe because we're so united in purpose. And even, when we met, we actually had the same idea before we knew each other. It ended up being a
competition, like, who's going to get there first? And then we were like, yo, you actually support me.
Yeah, so I mean, there have been some challenging times, but, I don't, it's such a minuscule part of our journey on with this that it hasn't actually been challenging.
And I say as relationships, as a couple, when you're going after something together, know your role and do not try to cross over each other's roles. Like, my wife is a researcher. I have to respect that she's a researcher because I'm like, a YOLO, let's go do it. I don't care. Amazing idea. 7 dinners back to back. She's like, logistics? Are there rules for our house?
What's the
People
outcome?
Just coming over and like, are they smoking cigars on the inside? Like, what's the rules?
Yeah.
And it took us time early in our marriage to get comfortable that we were really put together for a reason and to flow in that gifting and that reason together as a couple. So there's power that comes with like you two uniting. And so you just want to make sure that you give the space for each other to go down their path. And then when it's time to pull that together, pull it together. So. And just love the kid, right? Like, our daughter, we are her example. So everything we do, she sees us. And so we want to make sure that she just naturally grows up in that, oh, you can do this or you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So yes, go to MovementKC, like us, add us at FeastKC. I'll be posting about April 30th and then everything else that we're doing. We'll save the world eventually, but we'll just start off with feasting first.
Thank you so much. I was going to approach you. Have you all met Ruben Alonzo? Okay, good. Because I thought, if you haven't, I've got to make that connection.
Thank you so much.
He and his wife Shannon are neighbors from when we lived in Union Hill.
Okay.
And he's just, got that